There are plenty of tough bosses in Path of Exile 2, but Act 1's final boss is perhaps the hardest you'll face during the entire early game. Count Geonor, otherwise known as the Count or Mad Wolf of Ogham, will likely be the true test of your build at the end of Act 1. If you're looking to finally get past Count Geonor in Act 1 and POE2, you're in the right place. I'm Joey with esports.gg, and today we'll show you the best strategies to defeat this challenging boss. For starters, Count Geonor is a two-phase boss, with the second phase coming as you start to deplete the boss's last half of HP. As such, you want to ensure you're using as few life and mana charges as possible during the first phase, since all the damage you're dealing doesn't actually matter in the long run. During both phases of the fight, Count Geonor will use ice attacks mixed with various types of AoE explosions. If possible, it's a wise idea to try and equip any charms or gear that reduces the amount of ice damage you take. For any new gear, remember to check your vendors back at the Clearfell encampment, as their stock resets every time you level up in POE2. The Count of Ogham will also conjure his wolf form several times prior to his demise, but you won't see it much until the second phase. Both phases of the fight will also see you fend off smaller wolf enemies that pester you more than anything. While these wolves do go away after a certain point whenever they're spawned, they can deal a solid amount of damage while they're in the arena. And with that basic info out of the way, let's get into the fight itself. You'll begin by facing off against Count Geonor in his human form. The main attack you have to worry about here is an ice move that sees the boss transform into a wolf and shoot a sword at you. He also has a sweeping ice sword move that covers a good amount of distance, and this usually follows the previous attack. If you're using a ranged build, keeping several meters away from Count Geonor is recommended most of the time to avoid that sweeping sword move. However, melee builds will have to predict it and dodge out of the way, as they need to be closer for their attacks. The third most common move you'll see during the first phase is a trap attack that spawns two ice walls in front of Count Geonor. If you manage to dodge out of the way of the attack, this is the best time to damage the boss, as he's vulnerable for a few seconds. If you get trapped in the walls, however, hit either side to escape before the walls can damage you. After you've dealt a good amount of damage to the Count, he'll place his sword in the ground around some ice, transform into a large wolf, and summon a few smaller enemies. Soon after this happens, the Count will bound into the air and explode onto the ground in a circular radius. Get ready to dodge as soon as you see the build-up to this attack happen. When the explosion is over, defeat the smaller wolves and dodge the Count as he darts around the arena after you. Once the smaller wolves are gone, watch out for the Count's planted sword, as he recalls it once he turns back into a human. If you're unfortunately in the path of the sword when he recalls it, you'll likely be one-hit KO. The best gameplay loop you can utilize during the first phase is attacking in between the Count's combos. After most attacks, there's a 2 to 3 second window where you can easily get in free damage. Make the most of this damage and then back off to get away from his close range attacks. The key in the first phase is keeping your HP up so you can save more charges for the second phase. Once you've dealt a little over half HP to Count Geonor, he will turn into his final form, which is a much larger wolf with 2 bloody jaws. The second phase sees the boss get all of his HP back as well, so you have to start from square one. The Mad Wolf of Ogham uses a few more ice attacks in the second phase, all of which are much more lethal. The main one to look out for is a spreading ice attack, which explodes after it reaches its maximum length. This can be easily avoided by backing up to the furthest depth of the arena where the ice doesn't reach. The other ice move to watch out for is an icicle attack that has 3 turns. The best way to not take damage here is to stay stationary and quickly move to spots that don't have an icicle on them. Don't try to dodge too fast though, as you might get caught in an icicle's path. Fortunately, Count Geonor can be damaged while he's performing all these attacks. So if you can manage to avoid them, you can get an easy damage during the attacks and shortly after them. However, in between the ice moves, the boss can repeat his air explosion attack from the first phase. This can be dodged if you see it coming, and after the boss comes down from the sky, you can attack him for a second or two before he attacks again. After you've damaged Count Geonor around a third of his HP, he will retreat into some fog that appears on the map. As he's retreating, make sure to get him plenty of damage until he fully disappears. When he does, you have to deal with an onslaught of wolves chasing you along with Count Geonor darting in and out of the fog. If you get hit by the boss when he's darting around, you take massive damage. The best strategy you can use is to simply run a circle around the fog, which avoids the wolves and Count Geonor if you time things correctly. You can also choose to try and kill all the wolves, but you need a powerful build to take each one out while also avoiding the boss. The fog phase lasts for around 30 seconds and ends with the wolves dying and Count Geonor coming back on the map with a huge stomp attack. After he comes back, he'll usually use a sweeping sword attack, so don't try and get too close. After the first fog phase is over, the boss uses the same attacks, and once he's damaged for another third of his HP, the fog phase happens again in the exact same way. If you manage to get out of it alive, Count Geonor will only change one move for the final stretch of the fight. Instead of using straight ice for the icicle attack, the boss uses a bloodstream. The attack is the same besides that though, so you still have to avoid the streams on the ground before they explode during each of the 3 turns. If you don't damage Count Geonor fast enough when he gets down to low HP, he will do another fog attack. In the third fog attack, there are more blood streams you have to watch out for in addition to dodging wolves and the boss himself. However, if you can kill him quickly when he's at low HP, the third fog phase won't happen. The best strategy for the second phase of the Count Geonor fight is to memorize his attacks. They're fairly easy to predict and avoid, and if you can do that, you're able to get off free damage while the boss is performing them. You also want to try and use as few life charges as possible during the fog phases. It's best to save those in case you get hit by one of the boss's main attacks. Those moves tend to deal more damage overall, so having more life charges in your back pocket is worth the effort. The same goes for mana charges if your build relies on those as well. One additional strategy you want to ensure you're using is dealing stun damage to the Mad Wolf. Right underneath the boss's health bar, you'll see another tan bar. This is the boss's stun meter, and when it fills up, the boss becomes immobile for roughly 5 seconds. This allows you to deal huge damage while risking nothing in the process. Certain skills deal more stun damage than others, so take a look at your build to see if you can utilize that strategy. If you can take advantage of your damage windows and learn to predict and avoid the Count's attacks, you'll get through this boss fight relatively unscathed. Of course, that's easier said than done. For those of you still struggling, I recommend trying to change up your build. You can also attempt to get another level in the Ogham Manor by killing mobs, which nets you a new passive point to spend. Also, as I previously mentioned, try checking out your vendors to see if they have a better weapon or stronger gear. You can also visit the hooded one at the Clearfell encampment to respec your passive abilities if you want to totally change up your build. Hopefully, with enough time and patience, you'll be able to get through Count Geonor and get past Act 1 in Path of Exile 2. Also, make sure to share any advice you have with the boss fight down in the comments below so other players can see. We'll see you next time here on esports.gg.